Cameron Todd Willingham. The execution of an innocent man. In 1991, Cameron Todd Willingham was a 23-year-old, unemployed mechanic. Cameron's wife, Stacy Kuykendall, was the mother of his 3 children. 2-year-old Amber Louise Kuykendall, and 1-year-old twins, Carmen Diane Willingham and Camara Marie Willingham. On December 23, 1991, Cameron Todd Willingham, of Corsicana, Texas, awoke to find that his home was on fire. His children were asleep in their room and his wife was out shopping for Christmas presents for the family. He attempted to reach his 3 young children slept, but the fire was too intense, so he exited the home to get help. The fire department extinguished the fire, however the children did not survive. Willingham, who was visibly distraught and had to be restrained to keep him from running back into the home, opened his home to investigators, hoping to get some answers as to what caused the fire. Initially, the town of Corsicana, near Waco, supported the Willingham family and took up a collection to help with funeral costs. 2 arson investigators were assigned to the case. Douglas Fogg, the assistant fire chief of Corsicana and certified arson investigator. Manuel Vasquez, a deputy fire marshal, known for adages such as, "The fire tells the story. I am just the interpreter." After examining the scene of the fire, the investigators determined that the fire was deliberately set, having found 20 indicators of arson. The 2 arson investigators and a police officer questioned Willingham on New Year's Eve. Willingham walked them through the events of the night, and during questioning the investigators concluded that Willingham had to be lying. He became their suspect. The indicators of arson would later prove to be without scientific merit. There was no valid proof of arson in the case. Ethical failures in this case include prosecutorial misconduct, arson evidence that is junk science, experts testifying beyond expertise, psychological evaluations given by doctors without examination of Willingham or expertise in the field, political interference with the Science Commission reviewing forensics, and defense attorneys failed to provide a zealous defense. John Jackson, assistant district attorney for the Willingham case, was formally accused of misconduct by the State Bar of Texas in March 2015. The State Bar has stated that there is evidence that John Jackson concealed evidence before, during, and after the trial that negated the guilt of Cameron Todd Willingham. Jackson provided benefits to an inmate in exchange for a testimony in the Willingham case, including a reduced sentence, lower security facilities for his sentence, as well as assistance after his release from prison. Jackson has been accused of obstruction of justice, making false statements, and concealing evidence favorable to Willingham's defense. Johnny E. Webb testified that he and Willingham were in the Corsicana jail at the same time, and that Willingham confessed to murdering his daughters by arson. Webb later recanted his statement and stated that he was coerced into making the statement under a threat of a harsher sentence at a higher security prison. Jackson had orders issued that reduced the crime Webb was convicted of from aggravated robbery to regular robbery, which resulted in an early release. He also had him transferred to an easier facility for time he served in jail. Arson investigation. The arson evidence was the most important evidence of the trial. The 20 indicators of arson, as Vasquez testified, were proof that the fire was deliberately set. These indicators included low burning fire, floors and lowest sections of walls burned, puddle configurations, burn patterns indicating the pooling of an accelerant, pour patterns, burn patterns indicative of an accelerant poured over surfaces, alligatoring, a charring pattern in wood that resembles an alligator's skin, crazed glass, a cracking pattern observed in glass attributed to high temps of accelerant fire. All indicators were later shown to be invalid proof of arson. The hallway, bedroom, and front door threshold of the Willingham home illustrate the fire damage that occurred and some of the false indicators that the arson investigators relied on to conclude the fire was deliberate. The low burning of the floor is evident from the band of drywall/sheetrock that remains untouched at the bottom of the walls. The alligatoring patterns can be observed in the wood of the back wall. The flooring under the threshold did not burn. It is also where the only accelerant trace was found, next to the family's charcoal grill. All of the evidence previously listed was debunked by the Hearst report and several other reports that also looked at the evidence since the execution. The majority of the evidence attributed to fires started by a liquid accelerant are observed in non-accelerated fires. When a structure gets hot enough in a fire, flashover will occur and any flammable material in the room can catch on fire. Willingham could walk out of the home barefoot without burns if he did so before flashover, which did not happen until after Willingham was out of the home. The investigators relied on faulty on-the-job training and had little formal education in arson investigation. The National Fire Protection Association (NFPA) issued their Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations a few weeks after the trial concluded. Much of the knowledge in the publication was known in the field well before the Willingham fire and should have been known to arson experts. Arson evidence was leaked and eyewitness testimony changed to corroborate the findings. Vasquez testified regarding the motive, intent, and truthfulness of statements made by Willingham, areas for which he is not an expert. He also made a claim that the defense's injuries were self-inflicted, a conclusion that could not be supported by any evidence. Two medical experts testified that Willingham was a sociopathic individual who was a bomb waiting to go off. Neither expert met with Willingham to evaluate him for any condition and lacked the expertise to make those findings. One doctor stated that the Iron Maiden poster, Led Zeppelin picture, and other art implied that Willingham must have satanic-type interests and a focus on death. These doctors were prime examples of hired guns. Willingham's attorneys contacted a nationally recognized arson expert, Gerald Hearst, to produce a report to try to save him. In this report, Hearst invalidated nearly every conclusion made by the arson investigators in the Willingham case as scientifically unfounded. The governor and the Board of Pardon and Parole both received the report days before the scheduled execution, but neither body acted on the report. Cameron Todd Willingham was executed on February 17, 2004 by lethal injection, reaffirming his innocence in his final statement. The Federal Justice for All Act resulted in the creation of the Texas Forensic Science Commission, TFSC. This commission raised the issues of invalid forensics in the Willingham case. The TFSC was charged with investigation of alleged negligence and misconduct in forensics. Experts for the Chicago Tribune and the Innocence Project re-examined the arson evidence and determined it to be flawed, showing a lack of scientific support for every indicator relied upon in the case. The competence and knowledge of investigator Vasquez was called into question. There was hope that the TFSC would review every case of arson in which its experts gave testimony. The TFSC, after delays in funding and member appointment, again asked an expert, Dr. Craig Baylor, to review the evidence and report his findings. The findings matched that of other investigators. The investigations failed to properly apply science and basic knowledge of arson investigation. There was no scientific basis for the conclusions that were made in the case. However, before the TFSC could review the report and issue findings, Texas Governor Rick Perry removed members of the commission, which resulted in delays. The new chair canceled a meeting and slowed the progress of the commission enough to ensure no findings were issued before the election for governor. The governor delayed the work of the TFSC in order to avoid the possible finding that an innocent man was executed by Governor Perry's office. The TFSC was limited in its report due to legal limits regarding its jurisdiction. However, it did release a report outlining the flaws found in the case. Ineffective assistance of counsel. The attorneys for Willingham failed to challenge any part of the case presented by the prosecution. The primary defense attorney stated in an interview years after the execution that he knew his client was guilty, no doubt about it. No expert witness was brought in to testify or review the evidence against Willingham. The only witness called was a babysitter to testify that Willingham wouldn't hurt his children. If the defense for Willingham would have raised any of the numerous issues present in this case, the result could have been very different and Cameron Todd Willingham could still be alive. Willingham wrote that he hoped someday that his name would be cleared of the crimes for which he was accused. Groups such as the Innocence Project have worked continuously to honor that request. Groups that are in support of the death penalty have worked to prohibit such actions from taking place. The state of Texas must acknowledge the mistakes made and work to prevent similar issues in the future.